The screaming started at exactly 6 a.m., just like every other morning for the past 18 months. Alexander Montgomery III stood in his marble bathroom, adjusting his Armani tie while the sound of absolute chaos echoed through his penthouse. Crash, bang, more screaming, then an ominous silence that somehow felt worse than the noise. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Nanny, number 52, quit via text at 5:47 a.m. She's blocking your number and says she's considering therapy. The children are creative today. Hello friends, thank you so much for stopping by. Please support me by subscribing to my channel, like and share this video to your family and friends. I truly appreciate your kind heart. So, let's begin. Alexander closed his eyes and counted to 10. At 34, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion. He could negotiate deals that made grown men weep and had been featured on the cover of Forbes 6 times. But three small humans, his own flesh and blood, had him completely defeated. Sir? His housekeeper, Maria, appeared in the doorway looking frazzled. The children have, well, they've done something to the elevator. It only plays circus music now, and it won't stop. From somewhere in the penthouse came the faint sound of carnival tunes mixed with maniacal giggling. Alexander grabbed his briefcase. Call the emergency nanny service. Tell them to send someone who specializes in difficult cases. And Maria, maybe start looking for a new elevator technician. As he headed for the stairs because he refused to ride the circus elevator, Alexander's mind wandered to how different things had been 3 years ago. His wife Sarah had been alive then, and somehow she'd managed their triplets with grace and laughter. Mason, Madison, and Matthew had been challenging even then, but they'd been happy challenges. Normal 3-year-old chaos, not the strategic warfare they waged now. Since Sarah's death in that terrible car accident, the children had transformed into tiny, brilliant terrorists. They didn't just act out, they orchestrated elaborate schemes that would impress military strategists. Last week's nanny had quit after discovering they'd somehow rewired the smart home system to play death metal whenever someone said the word bedtime. The week before that, they'd convinced nanny number 50 that the penthouse was haunted by filling the walls with speakers and playing spooky sounds at random intervals. When she'd finally figured out the trick, she'd found them in the security room, watching her reactions on multiple monitors while eating popcorn. Alexander loved his children desperately, but he was running out of options, and patience, and nannies. Downtown, Zara Williams was having the worst morning of her professional life. She'd just been fired from her position at the Sunshine Children's Academy, not for poor performance, but because she'd spoken up about their treatment of the minority children. Apparently, pointing out systemic bias wasn't appreciated, even when you had a master's degree in child psychology and 5 years of exemplary service. She sat in her small apartment, staring at the stack of rejection letters from other positions. Everyone wanted experience with normal children. Nobody wanted to hire someone who specialized in what they called problem cases, children who acted out because of trauma, neglect, or simple misunderstanding. Her phone rang. Emergency nanny services, this is dispatch. We have a situation. Zara almost laughed. I'm not sure I'm emergency material right now. Trust me, honey, you are. We need someone for the Montgomery family. Penthouse on 5th Avenue. 3 children, ages 4. The pay is, well, let's just say it's enough to cover your rent for the next 2 years if you last a week. What's the catch? 52 nannies have quit this year. The children are gifted. Zara had worked with gifted children before. She knew that gifted was often code for misunderstood, and challenging usually meant crying for help. I'll take it. 2 hours later, Zara stood outside the most intimidating building she'd ever seen. The doorman looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. You're here for the Montgomery children? He shook his head sadly. Good luck, miss. The last one came down crying something about tiny devils and psychological warfare. The elevator ride to the penthouse was surreal. Circus music played cheerfully while she ascended 40 floors.
When the doors opened, she was greeted by a harried-looking woman in her 50s. "Thank God you're here. I'm Maria, the housekeeper. Mr. Montgomery is at work, but he said to show you around and—" She paused as a crash echoed from somewhere in the apartment. "Well, to prepare you." The penthouse was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, expensive art on every wall, furniture that probably cost more than Zara's college education. But there were signs of chaos everywhere. Scorch marks on one wall, a chandelier that hung at an odd angle, what looked like a small crater in the marble floor of the foyer. "What happened there?" Zara asked, pointing to the crater. "Science experiment gone wrong. Or right, depending on your perspective. They were testing something about density and impact, very advanced for 4-year-olds, but the results were destructive. They walked through rooms that told the story of brilliant children left to their own devices, a library with books arranged in complex mathematical patterns, a playroom that looked like NASA had exploded inside it, and everywhere the subtle signs of minds that were far too advanced for typical childhood activities. "Where are they now?" Zara asked. "Plotting," Maria said grimly. "They always get quiet when a new nanny arrives. It means they're planning something elaborate." As if on cue, 3 small faces appeared around the corner, watching Zara with intense curiosity. She got her first good look at the infamous Montgomery triplets. Mason stood in front, clearly the leader. He had dark hair like his father and sharp green eyes that seemed to be calculating her weaknesses. Madison hung back slightly, blonde curls framing a face that looked deceptively angelic. Her blue eyes held an intelligence that was almost unnerving in someone so young. Matthew, the smallest, clutched a tablet and kept glancing between it and Zara as if he was taking notes. "So," Mason said, stepping forward with the confidence of a tiny CEO, "you're the new nanny." "I'm Zara," she replied, crouching down to their eye level. "And you must be the famous Montgomery triplets I've heard so much about." "Famous for what?" Madison asked suspiciously. "For being incredibly smart and creative. I hear you're quite the problem solvers." The 3 children exchanged glances. This wasn't the response they were used to. "We made the last nanny cry," Matthew informed her helpfully. "She said we were unholy terrors and that our father should send us to military school." "That's terrible," Zara said seriously. "Adults shouldn't say things like that to children. You're not terrors. You're just kids who are probably bored out of your minds." Mason's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" "Because I was a kid like you once, too smart for my own good, always getting in trouble because the adults around me didn't understand what I needed." This was clearly not going according to their usual script. Madison stepped forward. "What did you need?" "Challenges, real ones, and someone who didn't treat me like I was broken just because I was different." For a moment, the children just stared at her. Then Mason seemed to make a decision. "Come on," he said. "We want to show you something." They led her to what had once been a formal dining room, but was now clearly their command center. The walls were covered with charts, diagrams, and what looked like architectural plans. A large table in the center held an elaborate miniature city made from blocks, Legos, and various electronic components. "This is New Montgomery," Madison explained proudly. "It's a city we designed. It has sustainable energy, efficient transportation, and housing for everyone." Zara examined the model closely. The level of detail was extraordinary. They'd incorporated solar panels, wind turbines, even what looked like a water purification system. "This is incredible," she said, and meant it. "How long did this take you?" 3 months, Matthew said. "We work on it every day. Well, when we're not dealing with nannies." "The nannies don't like it," Mason added. "They say we should play with normal toys." "Normal is overrated," Zara replied. "This is way more interesting than normal toys. Can you tell me how the transportation system works?" For the next hour,
The children enthusiastically explained every aspect of their creation. They thought of everything, from traffic flow to waste management to recreational spaces. It was the kind of comprehensive urban planning that would impress professional city designers. As they talked, Zara began to understand what had been happening with the nannies. These children weren't acting out because they were bad. They were acting out because they were intellectually starved. Every caregiver had tried to force them into age-appropriate activities that couldn't begin to challenge their exceptional minds. You know what I think? Zara said when they'd finished their presentation. I think you three are going to change the world someday. But first, we need to figure out how to channel all this amazing creativity in ways that don't involve making elevators play circus music. Mason grinned, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. You figured out that was us? Lucky guess. Though I have to admit, it's pretty impressive that you managed to hack into the building's elevator system. Matthew did that part, Madison said proudly. He's really good with computers. I can see that, but here's the thing. I bet we can find even more interesting challenges for you that won't get us in trouble with building management. Like what? Matthew asked eagerly. Well, I noticed your city has a transportation system, but have you thought about emergency services, fire departments, hospitals, police? Those are complex logistical challenges. The children's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of problem solving they craved. And, Zara continued, I bet we could build working models, test different approaches, maybe even present your findings to real city planners. Really? Madison breathed. Really. But first, we need to establish some ground rules. I'm not here to stop you from being brilliant. I'm here to help you be brilliant in ways that don't terrorize the staff or traumatize other caregivers. Over the next few hours, Zara worked with the children to establish what she called their genius code, a set of agreements about how they would channel their incredible minds. They could pursue any intellectual challenge they wanted, but they had to consider the impact on others. They could experiment and explore, but they had to prioritize safety. Most importantly, they would work together as a team instead of against the adults in their lives. By the time Alexander came home that evening, the penthouse was transformed. Instead of chaos, he heard the sound of intense discussion coming from the dining room. He found Zara and the children hunched over their miniature city, debating the merits of different emergency response protocols. Daddy, Madison called out when she saw him. Zara says our city design is good enough to show real architects. And she knows about emergency management systems, Mason added excitedly. She used to help design evacuation plans for schools. Really? Alexander looked at Zara with new interest. Part of my graduate work, she explained, I specialized in crisis management and child psychology. When you're working with traumatized children, you learn a lot about emergency systems. Alexander studied the scene before him. His children looked genuinely happy and engaged. There were no signs of destruction, no evidence of elaborate pranks, just three brilliant kids working on something constructive with an adult who clearly understood them. How long have you been here? He asked. Since this morning, Zara replied. And I have to say, your children are extraordinary. They're not problem children. They're gifted children who've been profoundly understimulated. All the other nannies said they were impossible. They were impossible for caregivers who didn't understand what they needed. These kids require intellectual challenges that match their capabilities. When they don't get that, they create their own challenges, usually in ways that adults find disruptive. Alexander felt a mix of relief and guilt wash over him. Relief that someone finally understood his children, and guilt that it had taken so long to find the right person. So you're saying all the pranks and chaos were symptoms of boredom and frustration, Zara finished. They're too smart for typical preschool activities, but they're still emotionally 4 years old. They need someone who can meet them at their intellectual level while helping them develop appropriate social and emotional skills. That night, after the children were peacefully asleep for the first time in months, Alexander and Zara sat in his study discussing her approach. I have to ask, Alexander said, why are you so good at this? Your resume shows experience with difficult cases, but this is something else entirely. Zara was quiet for a moment. I grew up in foster care, she said finally. Bounced between homes because I was labeled a problem child. I was acting out because I was grieving my mother's death and because I was intellectually frustrated. But instead of getting help, I got moved around until I aged out of the system. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, but it taught me something important. Children's behavior is always communication. They're telling us what they need, but we have to be willing to listen. Alexander looked at her with growing respect. And that's why you went into child psychology. I wanted to be the adult I needed when I was a kid, someone who could see past the behavior to the underlying needs. What do my children need? Zara smiled. Intellectual stimulation, emotional support, and someone who believes in their potential instead of seeing them as problems to be managed. They're still grieving their mother, but they're also hungry for challenges that match their exceptional minds. Over the following weeks, the Montgomery household underwent a complete transformation. Zara implemented what she called genius level learning for the triplets. Instead of coloring books and simple puzzles, she brought in advanced building sets, coding games, and science experiments. She turned their daily routines into learning opportunities, having them calculate measurements for cooking, research different cultures for their meals, and analyze the architecture of buildings they passed on walks. The pranks stopped entirely, not because Zara forbade them, but because the children were finally getting the mental stimulation they craved through constructive channels. When Mason showed interest in how elevators worked, she arranged a field trip to see the building's mechanical systems. When Madison wanted to solve mysteries, Zara created elaborate treasure hunts that required logic, research, and problem-solving skills. When Matthew expressed curiosity about computers, she introduced him to age-appropriate programming concepts. Alexander found himself rushing home from work each day, eager to see what new project or discovery awaited him. His children were not just behaving, they were thriving in ways he'd never imagined possible. Look what we built today, Madison announced one evening, leading him to see a complex marble run that filled half the living room. It demonstrates physics principles like momentum and gravity, and we calculated all the angles. And tomorrow, we're going to test different variables, Mason added enthusiastically, like what happens if we change the weight of the marbles or the steepness of the ramps. Alexander was amazed. A month ago, his children had been tiny terrorists. Now they were budding scientists. But it wasn't just their intellectual development that impressed him. Under Zara's guidance, the children were also learning emotional regulation, empathy, and social skills. She helped them understand that their exceptional abilities came with responsibility. They could use their minds to help others and solve problems, not just to create chaos. More than that, Alexander found himself changing too. Zara encouraged him to be more involved in the children's daily lives, to see their projects not as distractions, but as windows into their remarkable minds. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt connected to his children in a meaningful way. I don't know how to thank you, he told Zara one evening after the children were asleep. You've given me my family back. You never lost your family, she replied gently. You just needed help understanding what they needed from you. As the months passed, Alexander began to realize that his feelings for Zara went beyond gratitude. She had become an integral part of their family, bringing not just stability, but joy and laughter back into their home. The children adored her, but more than that, they respected her. She had managed to harness their exceptional minds while nurturing their emotional growth. But it was more than her professional skills that drew Alexander to her. Zara was intelligent, compassionate, and strong in ways that took his breath away. She had overcome a difficult childhood to become someone who healed other people's families. She saw potential where others saw problems, and she faced every challenge with grace and determination. The realization that he was falling in love with her was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah had been gone for 2 years, but the guilt of moving forward still haunted him. Would it be fair to the children? Would it dishonor Sarah's memory? One evening, as he watched Zara help Matthew with a particularly complex engineering project, he knew he couldn't keep his feelings to himself any longer. "Zara," he said after the children were in bed, "can we talk?" She looked up from the lesson plans she was preparing for the next day. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Alexander sat down beside her on the couch, his heart racing. "Everything is more than all right. That's what I want to talk to you about." She waited patiently, giving him space to find his words. 6 months ago, my life was falling apart. My children were impossible. I was failing as a father, and I couldn't see any way forward. Then you walked into our lives and changed everything. Alexander, please let me finish. You didn't just solve our problems. You helped us become the family we were meant to be. You saw the best in my children when everyone else saw only their worst. You helped me understand them, connect with them, love them better. Zara's eyes were soft with understanding. That's what families do for each other. Exactly. And that's what I realized. You're not just our nanny, Zara. You're family. You're the heart of this home, the person who makes us all better versions of ourselves. He took her hands in his, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. I know this is complicated. I know you came here to take care of my children, not to deal with their father's feelings. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just gratitude. Zara's breath caught. Alexander, I love you, Zara. I love your strength, your wisdom, your enormous heart. I love the way you see possibilities where others see problems. I love how you've helped me become the father I wanted to be. And if I'm being completely honest, I love the way you make me feel like myself again for the first time since Sarah died. Tears gathered in Zara's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it, but somewhere along the way, this became my family too. You and Mason and Madison and Matthew, you're everything I never knew I was looking for. Alexander felt a weight lift from his chest. Really? Really? But are you sure about this? The children have been through so much loss already. If we do this, it has to be forever. I won't be another person who leaves them. Forever is exactly what I'm hoping for, Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket for the ring he'd been carrying for weeks. Which is why I have a question to ask you. He dropped to one knee right there in the living room, holding out a ring that sparkled in the lamplight. Zara Williams, will you marry me? Will you be not just the woman who saved my family, but the woman who completes it? Through happy tears, Zara said yes. The wedding took place 6 months later in the penthouse's garden, with Mason, Madison, and Matthew serving as ring bearers and flower girl. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended by close friends and colleagues, but the joy was immeasurable. In his vows, Alexander spoke about how Zara had taught him that love wasn't just about finding someone to share your life with, it was about finding someone who helped you become the best version of yourself. She had done that not just for him, but for his entire family. In her vows, Zara talked about how she had spent her career helping other people's children, never imagining she would find her own family in the process. She promised to love and cherish not just Alexander, but Mason, Madison, and Matthew for all the days of her life. The children, now 5 years old and more brilliant than ever, had written their own vows to their new stepmother. They promised to always challenge themselves, to use their gifts to help others, and to remember that being different wasn't something to hide, it was something to celebrate. As they exchanged rings, circus music began playing softly in the background, the children's way of honoring how their story had begun. But this time, instead of chaos, the music represented joy, laughter, and the beautiful unpredictability of family love. 2 years later, the Montgomery family was featured on the cover of Exceptional Children magazine. The article, titled From Chaos to Champions, told the story of three gifted children who had gone from terrorizing nannies to winning national science competitions and the remarkable woman who had helped them channel their gifts into positive change. Dr. Zara Montgomery. She had taken Alexander's name and completed her doctorate in gifted child psychology, now ran a consulting practice helping other families navigate the challenges of raising exceptionally bright children. Her waiting list was 2 years long, and she had been asked to speak at conferences around the world. But her greatest success was still her own family. Mason, now 7, was already showing signs of becoming a brilliant engineer. His latest project was designing better playground equipment for children with disabilities. Madison had published her first mystery story and was working on a series featuring a young detective who solved cases using scientific methods. Matthew had taught himself 3 programming languages and was developing educational games for other gifted children. Alexander had learned to balance his business empire with being a present, engaged father. He still worked hard, but he also coached Mason's robotics team, helped Madison research her stories, and served as beta tester for Matthew's games. He had discovered that success at work meant nothing if you weren't succeeding at home. As for Zara, she had found her calling in every sense of the word. She was not just a wife and mother, but an advocate for misunderstood children everywhere. Her work was changing how society approached giftedness, helping people understand that exceptional children weren't problems to be solved, they were gifts to be nurtured. Do you ever miss the chaos? Alexander asked one quiet evening as they watched their children work on their latest project, a working model of renewable energy systems. Zara laughed. You mean when your elevator played circus music and nannies fled in terror? Those were simpler times, he joked. No, they weren't, Zara said seriously. They were harder times. We were all struggling then. You, me, the children. We just didn't know how to help each other yet. And now? Now we're exactly where we're supposed to be. As if to prove her point, Madison looked up from her work and called out, Mom, Dad, come see this. We figured out how to make the wind turbine 30% more efficient. Alexander and Zara exchanged a look of pure contentment. Their family might be unconventional. A billionaire CEO, a child psychologist, and 3 genius children who could probably run a small country if they put their minds to it. But they were perfect for each other. The story that had begun with chaos and crying nannies had become something beautiful, a tale of love, understanding, and the incredible things that happen when someone believes in your potential instead of focusing on your problems. In the end, it hadn't taken magic to transform the impossible Montgomery triplets. It had taken something much more powerful, a woman who saw their brilliance instead of their behavior, their needs instead of their defiance, and their potential instead of their problems. And that had made all the difference in the world. The circus music had stopped playing long ago, but the joy and laughter it had announced continued to fill the Montgomery home every single day, because sometimes the most beautiful symphonies begin with the most unlikely overtures. Dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Please support me by subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to like and share this video. It means the world to me. Take care of yourself and never forget how much you're loved. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Sending you all my love.